Archaeologists have uncovered ancient structures so advanced they shouldn't exist. From walls built with impossible precision to temples aligned perfectly with the stars, these constructions are rewriting human history. And the strangest part? Many of them match descriptions from the Bible itself. Let's uncover the forgotten wonders that science still can't explain. Let's go!
Number 10. Pontius Pilate's inscription, the name carved in stone. This one's different from the others because it's not a massive construction, but it proves the existence of one of the Bible's most controversial figures. In 1961, Italian archaeologist Antonio Frova was excavating a Roman theater in Caesarea Maritima, the coastal capital of Judea during Roman rule. His team found a limestone block that had been reused in a stairway. But when they examined it closely, they noticed a Latin inscription. The text was partially damaged, but enough remained to read clearly: Pontius Pilatus, prefect of Judea. This was the first archaeological evidence outside the Bible confirming Pontius Pilate's existence and his official title. The inscription originally came from a structure dedicated to the Roman Emperor Tiberius, probably a temple or government building. Pilate had commissioned it, literally carving his name and title into stone. For years, skeptics questioned whether Pontius was a real historical figure or a character invented by gospel writers. This single stone settled the debate. The Pilate stone now sits in the Israel Museum, a simple limestone block that connects directly to the man who ordered Jesus' crucifixion. But there's more to Caesarea Maritima than just this inscription. The entire city was a construction marvel built by Herod the Great between 22 and 10 BC. Herod created an artificial deep-water harbor using innovative hydraulic concrete that hardened underwater, a technique ahead of its time. The harbor featured massive breakwaters protecting the port from storms, with towers marking the entrance. The city itself showcased Roman urban planning with a grid street layout, a theater, an amphitheater, a hippodrome for chariot racing, public bathhouses, and a massive aqueduct bringing fresh water from springs 6 miles away. The aqueduct is still partially visible today, running along the beach with its distinctive arches. Herod dedicated the city to Caesar Augustus, naming it Caesarea and making it the administrative capital of the region. This was where Pontius Pilate lived and ruled, only traveling to Jerusalem during major Jewish festivals to maintain order. The palace complex where Pilate resided featured elaborate mosaics, frescoes, and luxury accommodations, overlooking the Mediterranean. Excavations have uncovered the palatial structures, the administrative buildings, and the fortifications that made Caesarea a showcase of Roman power and engineering. The city's theater could seat 4,000 people, with perfect acoustics that still function today. Visitors sitting in the top rows can hear someone speaking normally on the stage below. The hippodrome hosted chariot races and could hold 10,000 spectators. The amphitheater was used for gladiatorial contests and public executions. This was Roman entertainment at its most spectacular and brutal. The combination of the Pilate stone and the city's ruins creates a tangible connection to the gospel accounts. These weren't stories set in a vague, mythical past. They happened in real cities with real Roman officials whose names were carved in stone and whose buildings still stand today.
Number 9. King Herod's Palace at Masada, the fortress in the sky. Perched on top of a flat mountain plateau in the Judean desert sits one of the most jaw-dropping architectural achievements you'll ever see. Masada rises about 1,300 feet above the Dead Sea, a natural fortress that seems impossible to reach, let alone build on. But King Herod the Great looked at this isolated rock and saw an opportunity to create something absolutely insane: a luxury palace complex complete with swimming pools, bathhouses, and storage rooms that could sustain thousands of people during a siege. Yeah, you read that right. Swimming pools on top of a desert mountain. The construction happened between 37 and 31 BC, and Herod spared no expense. Workers hauled millions of tons of materials up narrow, winding paths to the summit. The northern palace hung off the cliff face in 3 terraces, each level connected by staircases carved into the rock. The lowest terrace featured columns and elaborate frescoes painted in styles mimicking expensive marble and stone. These weren't simple buildings. They were architectural showpieces designed to impress anyone who saw them. The engineering challenges were brutal. Water had to be collected during rare rainstorms and stored in massive cisterns carved into the rock, holding enough to supply the entire complex for years. Food storage rooms were built to maintain supplies in the desert heat. Defensive walls surrounded the entire plateau with towers positioned at strategic points. But here's what really gets people. This wasn't just a military outpost. Herod built Roman-style bathhouses with hot, warm, and cold rooms. The hypocaust system underneath the floors channeled hot air to heat the rooms, the same technology used in Rome itself. Mosaic floors decorated the buildings with geometric patterns and designs. This was luxury living in one of the most remote and hostile environments imaginable. The fortress became famous for a different reason centuries later. In 73 AD, during the First Jewish-Roman War, Jewish rebels seized Masada and held out against Roman siege for months. The Romans built a massive siege ramp up the western side of the mountain, still visible today. When the Romans finally breached the walls, they found that the defenders had chosen death over capture. The story of Masada became a symbol of Jewish resistance and determination. Today, you can visit the ruins and see exactly what Herod built. Cable cars take tourists to the summit, but some still climb the ancient snake path as the sun rises over the Dead Sea. The palace remains are remarkably preserved thanks to the dry desert climate. You can walk through the rooms where Herod once entertained guests, see the bathhouse mosaics, and stand on the terraces looking out over a landscape that hasn't changed in 2,000 years. Archaeologists have excavated the site extensively, finding storage jars, weapons, coins, and even fragments of biblical scrolls hidden in the ruins. These discoveries confirm the historical accounts and provide tangible connections to the people who lived and died on this mountaintop fortress.
I'm going to ask you a simple question. Are you a naturally curious person? If you're watching, I'm pretty sure the answer is yes. This space is made for people like us. To ensure you're always part of this community and receive all our latest discoveries, you just need to do one thing: subscribe to the channel. It's the best way to stay connected with us. Okay, now that you're part of our Legion of the Curious, let's move on to the next item. Number 8. The Second Temple. From ashes to glory to ashes again. 70 years in exile had been brutal for the Jewish people. They watched as the Babylonians destroyed Solomon's temple in 586 BC, the sacred center of their faith reduced to ruins. The treasures were looted, the walls torn down, and the people were marched to Babylon in chains. But when the Persian king Cyrus conquered Babylon, he issued a shocking decree. The Jews could return home and rebuild their temple. Not only that, he would fund the reconstruction and return the sacred vessels that Nebuchadnezzar had stolen. The first wave of returning exiles faced a discouraging reality. The city was in ruins, the population was sparse, and they lacked the resources Solomon had commanded. The foundation was laid in 536 BC amid mixed emotions. Younger people celebrated with shouts of joy, but the elderly who remembered Solomon's temple wept openly. This new structure seemed pathetic in comparison, smaller and lacking the grandeur of its predecessor. There was no Ark of the Covenant, no fire from heaven, no gold-covered walls reflecting divine glory. But construction continued despite opposition from neighboring peoples who tried to stop the work. The prophet Haggai delivered an encouraging message. This temple would eventually surpass the former in glory. That seemed impossible at the time, but history had a surprise in store. Centuries later, Herod the Great took on a massive expansion project, starting around 20 BC. Herod was a ruthless ruler, but he understood spectacle and political symbolism. He transformed the modest Second Temple into one of the architectural wonders of the ancient world. The temple complex expanded to cover approximately 36 acres, with massive retaining walls creating a flat platform on top of the mountain.
Some of the foundation stones weighed over 500 tons. Modern engineers scratch their heads trying to figure out how ancient builders moved and positioned blocks that massive without modern cranes or machinery. The temple itself was reconstructed with white marble and gold plating that reflected sunlight so brilliantly that visitors had to look away. Massive columns supported porticos where thousands could gather. The court of the Gentiles allowed non-Jews to approach, though they couldn't enter the inner courts. Past that was the court of women, then the court of Israel for Jewish men, and finally the court of priests. At the center stood the temple building itself, with the holy place and the Holy of Holies. The whole complex was a masterpiece of religious architecture designed to inspire awe and reinforce the presence of God dwelling among his people. Jesus taught extensively in this temple, walked through its courts, and made a disturbing prophecy. Not one stone would be left standing on another. In 70 AD, that prophecy was fulfilled with devastating precision. The First Jewish-Roman War led to a siege of Jerusalem. Roman forces under Titus breached the city walls and set the temple on fire. The gold on the walls and roof melted in the intense heat, dripping between the stone blocks. Roman soldiers, eager to recover the precious metal, pried apart every stone, literally leaving not one stone standing on another in the main structure. All that remained was the western wall, part of the massive retaining wall that supported the temple platform. Today, it's the holiest site in Judaism, where Jews can pray, a remnant of glory and a reminder of loss. But the destruction of the physical temple opened a theological door. Jesus had declared himself the true temple, the place where God and humanity meet. His resurrection on the third day after his crucifixion was the rebuilding he spoke about. The presence of God would no longer be confined to a building in Jerusalem, but would dwell in the hearts of believers everywhere through the Holy Spirit. The shift from a physical temple to a spiritual one transformed religious practice forever.
Number 7. Noah's Ark, the ship that defied every impossibility. Picture this, a man standing in the middle of nowhere, axe in hand, staring at a massive pile of wood. No blueprints from an engineering firm, no construction crew with hard hats, no power tools. Just raw determination and a divine command that sounded absolutely crazy. Noah's mission was simple on paper, but brutal in execution. Build a vessel large enough to house thousands of animals and survive a flood that would wipe out everything else on Earth. The ark measured roughly 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 45 feet tall. To put that in perspective, you're looking at something nearly as massive as a modern cargo ship, except this one was built by hand with ancient tools. The construction material was gopher wood, a type that scholars still debate about today, sealed with pitch to make it waterproof. Now here's where things get wild. This wasn't a weekend project. Biblical accounts suggest Noah spent decades on this build, working under a blazing sun while his neighbors mocked him for building a giant boat in a place where no ocean existed. The logistics alone boggle the mind. How did he cut and shape timber that size? How did he create a structure stable enough to withstand massive waves? Engineers today have run computer simulations on the ark's dimensions, and shockingly, the proportions work. The length-to-width ratio gives it incredible stability in rough waters, something modern shipbuilders recognize as ideal design. But here's what really gets researchers fired up: the organizational genius behind it. The ark had 3 levels, multiple compartments, and ventilation systems. Someone had to figure out how to store food for months, manage waste from thousands of animals, and create an environment where predators and prey didn't destroy each other. Ancient animal husbandry meets extreme survival planning. Archaeological interest exploded in 1959 when a Turkish pilot photographed an unusual boat-shaped formation on Mount Ararat. Expeditions followed, some claiming to find petrified wood at high altitudes where trees don't grow.
Ground-penetrating radar detected patterns consistent with internal chambers. Yet conclusive proof remains elusive, buried under ice and political restrictions. Whether you believe in a global flood or a regional catastrophe, the story carries a punch. One person's obedience to an impossible task executed with precision that still impresses modern engineers thousands of years later. Number 6. The Tower of Babel, when ambition built too high. After the flood, humanity faced a clean slate. Everyone spoke the same language, shared the same culture, and possessed the collective knowledge to rebuild civilization. They settled in the plain of Shinar, an area in ancient Mesopotamia, and made a decision that would change human history forever. They weren't content with just building a city. They wanted to construct a tower reaching into the heavens, a monument to human achievement that would make their name legendary. The technology they employed was revolutionary for its time. Instead of relying on stone, which was scarce in the flat Mesopotamian plain, they invented fired bricks. They discovered that clay, baked in kilns, created building materials stronger and more uniform than anything available before. For mortar, they used bitumen, a tar-like substance that was waterproof and incredibly adhesive. With these innovations, they began building upward at a scale never attempted before. The structure rose higher and higher, a testament to what unified humanity could accomplish when working toward a common goal. But God observed this construction and recognized something dangerous in it. The people weren't just building a tower, they were attempting to establish their independence from divine authority, to create security and significance through their own power. So God confused their languages. Suddenly, the construction site descended into chaos. Workers who had coordinated perfectly now couldn't understand each other's instructions. A request for more bricks came out as gibberish. Orders were misinterpreted. The seamless cooperation that made the project possible evaporated in an instant. Construction halted, and the people scattered across the earth, forming different language groups and eventually different nations. The tower was abandoned, never completed. Now here's where archaeology enters the picture. Ancient Mesopotamia was filled with ziggurats, massive stepped pyramid structures that served as temples. The most famous was the Etemenanki in Babylon, dedicated to the god Marduk. Historical records describe it as a 7-tiered structure, rising approximately 300 feet high, with a base covering nearly 300 square feet. The name Etemenanki means House of the Foundation of Heaven and Earth, eerily similar to the stated purpose of Babel's Tower. The Greek historian Herodotus visited Babylon and described the ziggurat in detail, noting its massive scale and the spiral ramp that wound around its exterior. Archaeological excavations in the 19th and 20th centuries uncovered the foundation of this structure, confirming its existence and approximate dimensions. The ziggurat was destroyed and rebuilt multiple times throughout history, suffering damage from wars, weather, and neglect. Alexander the Great ordered its reconstruction, but the project was abandoned after his death. Eventually, the site was completely dismantled, its bricks recycled for other construction projects. Could the Etemenanki be the original Tower of Babel? The location fits, the construction methods match biblical descriptions, the ambitious scale aligns with the narrative. The linguistic connection between Babel and Babylon is direct. But definitive proof remains elusive, buried under centuries of subsequent construction and the modern city of Baghdad. What's undeniable is the story's cultural impact. The concept of linguistic diversity as divine intervention explains a fundamental human reality, why we speak different languages. It addresses the question of how humanity went from unified to fractured. And it serves as a warning about the limits of human ambition unchecked by wisdom or humility.
Number 5. The Walls of Jericho, when sound became a weapon. Jericho stands as one of humanity's oldest cities,
and its fortifications were legendary. We're talking about defensive walls so thick that houses were built into them, so tall that attackers would need siege equipment just to reach the top. Archaeological digs confirmed this wasn't exaggeration. The city had a double wall system, an outer wall about 6 feet thick and an inner wall roughly 12 feet thick, separated by a space of about 15 feet. Any military commander looking at that setup would immediately start planning a long siege with battering rams and towers. But the Israelite conquest didn't follow standard warfare protocols. According to the biblical account, God gave Joshua bizarre instructions. March around the city once a day for 6 days, in complete silence. Then, on the 7th day, circle it 7 times while priests blow trumpets, followed by a massive, unified shout from the entire army. No ladders, no rams, no conventional attack. Just walking, trumpet blasts, and yelling. Then the walls collapsed. British archaeologist Kathleen Kenyon excavated Jericho in the 1950s and discovered something fascinating. She found evidence of walls that had indeed fallen. But here's the kicker. They fell outward, not inward. When walls are destroyed by external attack, they collapse inward from the force. But Jericho's walls fell outward, creating a ramp of rubble that would allow attackers to walk straight up into the city. This matches the biblical description perfectly. Some researchers propose an earthquake as the natural explanation, and Jericho sits on a geological fault line where seismic activity happens regularly. But this theory creates its own problem: timing. How would Joshua know exactly when an earthquake would strike? The biblical account describes a specific moment, after 7 days of marching, on the 7th trip around the city, precisely when the trumpet sounded and people shouted. An earthquake hitting at that exact second would require supernatural coordination anyway. Another detail that baffles investigators: evidence suggests the city was destroyed quickly and then burned, with grain storage jars still full. Cities under prolonged siege ran out of food, but Jericho had abundant supplies when it fell, indicating a rapid conquest, not a drawn-out starvation strategy. The physics of sound waves offers another angle. Resonant frequencies can shatter glass and destabilize structures when they match the natural frequency of materials. Could coordinated sound waves from thousands of voices and trumpets have created vibrations that, combined with potential seismic instability, triggered a catastrophic structural failure? Modern acoustic engineers find this theoretically possible, but practically unlikely with ancient instruments and untrained voices. What remains undisputed? Jericho fell in a way that defies standard military tactics, and its ruins tell a story that aligns eerily well with an ancient text written thousands of years ago. Number 4. The Pool of Siloam, where water meets miracle. Hidden beneath modern Jerusalem for centuries, the Pool of Siloam represents one of the most significant archaeological discoveries related to biblical accounts. This wasn't just any pool. It was the endpoint of an incredible engineering project that brought fresh water into Jerusalem through solid rock, and, according to the Gospel of John, it was where Jesus healed a man born blind. The pool connected to Hezekiah's tunnel, a water channel carved through 1,750 feet of solid limestone. King Hezekiah ordered this construction around 701 BC when the Assyrian army was marching toward Jerusalem. The city needed a secure water source that couldn't be cut off during a siege. The Gihon Spring sat outside the city walls, vulnerable to enemy control. So Hezekiah's engineers devised a plan that sounds simple but was incredibly complex: tunnel through the hill and redirect the water inside the city walls. Here's what blows people away. 2 teams of workers started from opposite ends and met in the middle. They carved through solid rock using hammers and chisels, working in darkness with only oil lamps for light. The tunnel doesn't run straight. It curves and twists, following natural fissures in the rock. Yet somehow, these two teams managed to meet underground with only a small deviation. An inscription found in the tunnel describes the moment when the workers heard each other's picks through the final section of rock and broke through. The mathematical precision required to accomplish this without modern surveying equipment is staggering. The Pool of Siloam itself was discovered in 2004, when workers repairing a sewage pipe uncovered ancient stone steps. Archaeologists immediately recognized what they had found. The pool was much larger than previously thought, with multiple levels of steps leading down to the water. Coins found at the site dated to the period just before the first Jewish revolt, confirming its use during Jesus' lifetime. The steps were worn smooth by thousands of feet over centuries of use. People came here to draw water, to bathe for ritual purification, and, apparently, to witness miracles. The Gospel account describes Jesus making mud from dirt and his own saliva, placing it on a blind man's eyes, and telling him to wash in the Pool of Siloam. When the man washed, his sight was restored. The pool's name comes from the Hebrew word shilach, meaning sent, referring to the water sent through the tunnel. Today, visitors can walk through Hezekiah's tunnel with water still flowing ankle-deep, just as it has for 2,700 years. The experience is surreal, wading through a narrow passage carved by ancient hands, feeling the cool water that sustained Jerusalem through sieges and conquests. The tunnel and pool represent a convergence of engineering brilliance, historical significance, and religious importance that few sites can match.
Number 3. The Pools of Bethesda, double pools with double purpose. In Jerusalem's Christian quarter, buried under centuries of construction, lies another archaeological site that validates biblical accounts in striking ways. The Pool of Bethesda gets mentioned in the Gospel of John as a place where sick people gathered, believing the waters had healing properties. Jesus encountered a paralyzed man here who had been unable to walk for 38 years and healed him on the Sabbath, triggering controversy with religious authorities. For generations, scholars debated whether this pool even existed. The Gospel of John provides specific details. The pool had 5 porticos, or covered colonnades. That's an odd architectural feature. Why 5? Then, in the 19th century, excavations beneath the Church of St. Anne uncovered something remarkable. Not one pool, but 2 rectangular pools separated by a central partition. Each pool had porticos along its 4 sides, and the partition between them created a 5th covered area, exactly as the Gospel described. The pools dated to the 8th century BC, but were renovated and expanded during the Hellenistic and Roman periods. They served as water reservoirs connected to rainwater collection systems. But during the Roman period, the site transformed into a healing sanctuary associated with the god Asclepius. Archaeologists found votive offerings, evidence of ritual bathing, and structures consistent with a healing cult. This explains why sick people gathered there, waiting for healing. The pools weren't just for water storage. They had become a religious healing site. The double pool design was practical. One pool could be cleaned and maintained while the other remained in use. The depth varied, with steps leading down into the water at different levels. During excavations, archaeologists discovered the remains of the porticos John mentioned, along with fragments of columns and decorative elements from the Roman period. What makes this discovery significant is how it confirms the specific, unusual details in the biblical text. The Gospel writer wasn't making things up or speaking in vague generalities. He described a real place with accurate architectural details. The 5 porticos seemed like a random detail, but it turned out to be the key that unlocked the site's identification. Today, visitors can descend into the excavated area and see the ancient pools, the remains of the colonnades, and the layers of history built on top of each other. The site changed hands multiple times, from Jewish water reservoir to pagan healing temple to Christian church commemorating Jesus' miracle. Each layer tells part of the story.
Number 2. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon, the wonder that may not exist. Wait, hold up, before you say it. Yes, the Hanging Gardens appear in multiple ancient sources as one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. But here's the twist that drives historians crazy. There's no solid archaeological evidence they were actually in Babylon. Some researchers now think they might have been in Nineveh, built by the Assyrian king Sennacherib. Others question whether they existed at all. But the biblical connection and the legendary descriptions make this too important to ignore. Ancient writers described gardens built on multiple terraced levels, rising high above the ground, with trees, shrubs, and flowers creating a green mountain in the middle of a desert city. Water was supposedly pumped from the Euphrates River using an elaborate irrigation system, possibly involving screw pumps or chain pumps to lift water to the highest terraces. The engineering required would have been phenomenal for the time. King Nebuchadnezzar II allegedly built the gardens for his wife, who missed the green hills of her homeland. The gardens were meant to recreate those mountain landscapes in flat, arid Mesopotamia. Descriptions mention stone columns supporting wooden beams, covered with layers of reed, asphalt, and lead to waterproof them before soil was added deep enough for large trees to root. The Greek historian Strabo claimed the gardens covered about 400 feet on each side and rose as high as 75 feet. He described viewing platforms where people could look down on the gardens below and vaulted chambers underneath that housed the machinery for pumping water. Here's why this matters for biblical history. Nebuchadnezzar is the same king who conquered Jerusalem, destroyed Solomon's temple, and took the Jews into Babylonian captivity. The book of Daniel describes Nebuchadnezzar's pride in his building projects. The king boasts about the great Babylon he has built, displaying his mighty power and magnificent majesty. Whether the Hanging Gardens existed or not, Babylon under Nebuchadnezzar was an architectural marvel. The Ishtar Gate, covered in blue glazed bricks with images of dragons and bulls, was just one entrance to a city that amazed ancient visitors. The walls were so thick that chariots could race on top of them. Excavations in modern Iraq have uncovered remains of Nebuchadnezzar's palace and sections of the city walls. German archaeologist Robert Koldewey, working in the early 1900s, found an unusual vaulted structure with a well system near the palace that he believed could have been the foundation for the gardens. But the evidence remains inconclusive. Recent theories suggest the confusion might stem from mixed historical records. The Assyrian king Sennacherib definitely built elaborate gardens in Nineveh, complete with aqueducts and irrigation systems. His records describe bringing water from mountains through channels and creating a wonder for all peoples. Could later writers have attributed these gardens to the more famous city of Babylon? The mystery continues to fascinate because it touches on questions of historical reliability, archaeological evidence, and the power of legendary stories. Whether in Babylon or Nineveh, someone built something remarkable that its fame lasted for centuries.
Number 1. Solomon's Temple, where gold met glory. Mount Moriah in Jerusalem became the site of the most spectacular religious structure in ancient Israel. Solomon's Temple wasn't just a building, it was a statement of divine presence made manifest in stone, wood, and precious metals. King David wanted to build it, but God assigned the task to his son Solomon, who had the wisdom and resources to execute something truly extraordinary. The preparation phase alone was mind-blowing. Solomon conscripted 30,000 laborers who worked in shifts, plus 70,000 carriers and 80,000 stonecutters in the mountains. The stones were quarried and shaped at the site of extraction, then transported to Jerusalem. Here's what makes this remarkable. The biblical text states that no hammer, chisel, or iron tool was heard at the temple site during construction. Every stone arrived pre-cut, ready to fit perfectly like a massive three-dimensional puzzle. Try to wrap your head around that logistics challenge. We're talking about precision cutting and transportation of massive stone blocks without modern measuring tools or cranes. The cedars of Lebanon provided the primary wood, known for their durability and aromatic qualities. These trees were floated down the Mediterranean coast, then hauled overland to Jerusalem.
But the real showstopper was the gold. The interior walls were overlaid with pure gold, carved with cherubim, palm trees, and flowers. The Holy of Holies, the innermost sanctuary, was a perfect cube measuring 30 feet in each dimension, completely covered in gold. The altar was gold, the lampstands were gold, even the floors were overlaid with gold. Ancient records and biblical texts suggest Solomon used approximately 25 tons of gold just for the temple's interior. At today's prices, that's over $1 billion in gold alone, not counting the construction costs, labor, or other precious materials. The Holy of Holies housed the Ark of the Covenant, the most sacred object in Israelite religion. Two massive cherubim, carved from olive wood and overlaid with gold, stood 15 feet tall, with their wings spread, creating a protective canopy over the ark. When Solomon dedicated the temple, something supernatural happened. A cloud filled the entire structure, so thick and overwhelming that the priests couldn't continue their service. Then fire fell from heaven and consumed the sacrifices on the altar, while the people watched. This wasn't subtle symbolism. It was a public demonstration witnessed by thousands. The temple stood for nearly 400 years before Babylonian forces destroyed it in 586 BC. Archaeologists have searched for physical evidence, but the Temple Mount is one of the most politically and religiously sensitive sites on Earth, making excavation nearly impossible. However, ancient descriptions from visitors and historians confirm its magnificence. Tacitus and other Roman writers mentioned its wealth and splendor. What makes Solomon's temple architecturally significant beyond its religious importance? The proportions, the acoustic design, the ventilation systems, and the structural engineering all demonstrate sophisticated knowledge. The building was designed to channel sound, light, and even smoke in specific ways that enhanced the ceremonial experience. Modern architects studying the biblical descriptions recognize principles that wouldn't become common in Western architecture for centuries.
Still curious? Then don't stop now. The next mystery is already waiting for you. Just click the video on screen. I saved it just for you. See you there, curious one.